What's up, guys? Welcome to Roensch Capital Charts. Today we're taking a look at Palantir stock, ticker symbol PLTR, on a variety of time frames in anticipation of the next trading day, Tuesday, May 7th. All right, guys, Palantir stock, we just got earnings, of course. The intraday session, it was up $1.88 per share. That's plus 8.06% in regular trading hours. However, in the after hours here, after earnings, it's down about 8% from the intraday close. Okay, a little over 8%. We're down to 23.10 as of the end of after hours here. So a few things going on here. Now, the earnings themselves, we saw a meet on EPS, 8 cents versus the expected 8 cents. And we got a beat on revenue, 634.34 million. The expectation was 617.61 million at least. That's the one that I'm seeing tossed around the most. I've seen it as high as 625 million, but that will vary depending on where you look. Okay, the revenue is oftentimes the more different than the EPS expectation, depending on your source, because it's a little more exact. But either way, a beat on revenue. So, why is the stock down? Right. Well, you guys have heard me say a lot. And this is really, really crucial to understand here if you're trying to play earnings on these stocks. Guidance trumps everything. You can have a pretty bad earnings report and a wonderful guidance, and the stock can skyrocket. Likewise, you can have a pretty good earnings report, like we saw today, and not so impressive guidance, and the stock kind of tanks off. So here's what we got today. Current quarter revenue, the expectation from Palantir, the guidance, is expected to be between 649 million and 653 million. The problem was the expectation was 653 million. Okay, so where either a meet or slightly below that is the guidance here. Now, full year revenue, Palantir's expectation is somewhere between 2.68 billion and 2.69 billion. The consensus estimate was 2.71 billion, so that's a little light. So in a lot of ways, assuming no blowout earnings, that's going to trump most earnings reports, even if they're pretty good. Okay, so that would be why the stock is down. However, giving up basically just most of what we saw in terms of gains after hours Friday and today, pre-market and intraday. So let's take a look at this thing here. Now, we're going to start with a volume profile analysis. I do want to pull up the after hours and see if we saw good volume pouring in, which I can already see that we did. So we're going to take a look at that and see if there's any bias that helps us understand the actual movement. I want to take a look at the psychological levels because those are going to come in handy here tomorrow. And then we'll finish out here with how the expected move updated, okay, at least heading into the close, and then the directional bias coming out of the chain. It's earnings day. It's going to be a little different than normal, but we'll take a look. Let's start here by doing just a quick analysis of the volume profile here on the 5-minute chart. Now, intraday, again, it's kind of old news by now, intraday. The truth is, we didn't really see a whole lot of super obvious bias intraday. Some might argue that we saw perhaps a little bullish bias on this little push. The move was quite light, though. We saw increasing volume, then volume tanked off as soon as that push kind of leveled out. Okay, that's kind of like that, like when I'm scalping an in-play stock, for example. That's kind of the volume profile I'd be looking for on like a little breathe and go setup. So there was like a small amount of bullish bias there intraday, okay, but it wasn't tremendous. And then as we headed into the close, we got kind of a mixed bag heading into earnings as volume pumped. All right. Now the after hours is, in my opinion, going to be obviously the more important data to look at in terms of the volume profile because we have updated information now. So we see this volume actually hold. Okay, now you guys will hear me say a lot. When we're looking at after hours, I want to see volume meet, if not exceed, what we got during the middle of the day. And this certainly does. Okay, look at that. That doesn't happen all the time. It's actually very interesting that the earnings volume, even pretty deep, like an hour after the close, was still holding above most of the intraday session. That's interesting. That's good. That gives us some decent data to work with here. Now, what we saw is we see this rebalancing volume just ahead of the release. Okay, and then we saw volume kind of tank off, very much so a mixed bag. This here, guys, it's... I know a lot of people are going to look at this little piece as we kind of split hairs here and say that that was out of context bearish volume, but for me, you guys know when we have something like this where I'm kind of hesitating, I like to refer to the candles. And you see that was the low, okay? And not only was it the low, it was also a very wicky bar, and the bar before that started that out of context volume also had kind of a large wick, which tells me that, especially that second one, even the first one a bit, these were battle bars. We were seeing a lot of volume on both sides. Now, if this bar looked like this red bar, that's a very obvious bearish bar, okay, with mostly selling volume. But here we have a mixed bag of both buying and selling volume, which naturally pumps up the volume. So I'm not comfortable assigning bearish bias to that. As we move forward, we start to see what looks like the starts of bullish bias here, okay? However, volume after the fact kind of held on a little bit before fading. So some might argue that we did see some bullish bias here. It barely held on and then quickly faded after the fact on that green upside move. For me, it perhaps is there. It's very light, though. Now, I know some of you are looking at this and you're like, okay, there's no bias. What are we doing here? There's no bias. All right. And the truth is that tells us a huge story. Even when there's nothing, there's something. Okay? Because the stock's down, guys, 8% after hours. That's a big move. If you're a bear, you would expect to see tremendous bearish bias in the after hours, correct? At least you would like to see that. Because it's peeling back the onion, it's looking under the hood and seeing, yep, it obviously supported the move in my favor after hours. The volume profile also supported that. We're not really seeing that. And if you're a bull, the last thing you would want, I mean, the move happened, right? Everyone knows what the price is. The last thing you would want is to look under the hood and see massive red bars consecutively with very little bullish volume. That would be massive bearish bias supporting the pretty big dump off after hours. We're not seeing that. So listen, the move happened. All right, I'm not denying the stock's down, okay? But if we're going to look for more data, the truth is, you know, bulls, I'm not super upset by the volume profile, at least if I'm looking at this with a bullish eye. With a bearish eye, the move kind of trumps everything. But when I look under the hood, I'm not thrilled if I'm a bear looking at this and seeing really nothing supporting the move, other than, I suppose, the price action itself, okay? Now, let's move on, but first of all, listen, by the way, if you are new here, Palantir is a daily upload. You know, Palantir has been a stock I followed very closely since IPO. So I love talking about this stock every day. My goal here is 10,000 subscribers. I appreciate you subscribing, and I will keep the Palantir videos coming. Let's move on. Let's take a look at the self-fulfilling prophecy psychological levels, starting with the 30-minute chart. So these are the trading levels, the levels that everyone's going to be paying attention to, at least a huge chunk of people, which is what I mean by that self-fulfilling prophecy mentality. So if you look here, during the day, we were pulling away from that 50-period moving average, that white line, okay? Here in the after hours, on big volume. Now, the reason I typically say take after hours with a grain of salt is because volume is usually so low. However, when we're seeing big volume, the move by definition is more definitive because you have more participants taking part in the move, okay? So in the after hours here, we have broken beneath the 50 period, but the 200 period on the 30-minute held. So looking ahead to tomorrow, guys, bulls, I want to see the 200 period on the 30-minute hold. If we test it, I want to see a high volume bounce. But the goal really is to retake that 50 period moving average, which is about a 3.4% upside move, rip through, ideally during the intraday session on high volume, and then once we're above, make a low volume retest, high volume bounce. Okay, reclaim that as support. Whereas bears, any upside test of that 50 period, you want to see that reject hard. Let's move on to the 4-hour chart and take a look here. You can see here in the after hours, guys, we are testing the 200 period to a T in the after hours. This is very simple again. Bears, high volume break downside through the 200 period. Ideally, low volume retest, high volume rejection. That sets you bears up for a potential downside test of that 50 period moving average here on the 4-hour chart. Bulls, really simple here. You can see the 200 period is sitting just above that level that's really important on the daily chart, right? About 23 bucks a share, the top end of this $21.30 to $23 channel. Ideally, bulls, you would just want to see the 200 period on the 4-hour bounce, right? Because that's ahead of 23, and we don't want to end up in that channel again. We'll talk about that in a second here when we get to the daily. So bulls, the 4-hour though is really simple. Just ideally high volume bounce away, get some distance away from the 200 period here on the 4-hour chart is ideal, okay? And that can set you guys up for a push up toward each whole dollar then, right? Of course, 25 and 25.50 being big levels to watch out for here in the future from a bullish perspective. The daily chart, okay? Now, the daily does not show after hours movement. So the stock is at 23.10, so we have to consider that, and it has done so on pretty big volume, okay? So we look here. We closed above 25, just ahead of 25.50. All right, but we now find ourselves right about here. The daily chart has a really, really obvious story, and that is good because that means a lot of people are watching the very obvious story. Okay, so bears, for you guys, it's really simple. A few things I'm watching. I want to hold the 50-day moving average as resistance. I want to break downside back into this channel by breaking downside through 23. Ideally, reclaiming 23 as resistance. Okay, that would set you bears up for a potential near-term test of 21.30, which is the bottom end of that channel. Bulls. Step 1, hold 23 as support. Step 2, retake the 50-day moving average. Okay, it's really simple. Implied volatility. Guys, do not be surprised if implied volatility falls off a cliff tomorrow. It's very normal. Okay, after earnings, the options traders have less reason to expect volatility. The volatility event is over, right? So IV, the majority of the time, not always, but the vast majority of the time, will tank after earnings, and that will oftentimes suck some Vega value out of your contracts. The hope, though, when you're playing earnings, is that you are directionally correct enough to outrun that, all right? Now, let's see how expected move has updated, okay? Now, a few interesting things here. Because yesterday, when we did the Palantir video for today, Monday, and we did some math and some guesswork, we came to a couple of dollars of movement by today's close, Monday's close, and that's essentially exactly what we got. And then we took a little bit more than that into Tuesday's close, all right? However, in the after hours now, the stock has essentially reset. So this starts to get kind of messy with expected move because the expected move at the close, based on the 25.21 closing price, by Friday's close, okay, if you're following me here, is plus or minus $3.79 per share. Now, in the after hours here, it's down about a little over $2, right? So that's a pretty big chunk of that expected move. But what I want to do here is I want to watch tomorrow, and in tomorrow's Palantir video, we'll talk about this again and see how the options traders update that, okay? Because we have an after hours move that has yet to be priced into expected move, and tomorrow is going to tell us a lot about how the options traders are interpreting this volatility and how they expect volatility to adjust moving forward into the end of the week. However, right now, this after hours move has taken about more than half of a chunk out of that expected move by Friday. Okay, remember, that's a plus or minus because there is no directional bias baked in because it's the volatility expectation. That's on purpose. And directional bias coming out of the volume today. All right, again, this will be a great thing to look at tomorrow. Today, though, we got just under 1.2 million contracts traded during the intraday session, and we saw a bullish bias heading into the close. Okay, so we'll see how the stock plays out tomorrow. But we had just about 780,000 calls today and about 416,000 puts. And if we break that down by short-term speculator, it's interesting because that actually flips for that 0 to 20 delta range, the short-term speculators. We had 187,000 calls and about 215,000 puts. So the bias flipped from bullish on the overall to actually a bit bearish out of the short-term bets being placed. However, what that means is as you move deeper and higher in the delta ranges, which are going to be closer to at the money and then deeper in the money, right? On average, those longer term, more midterm and longer term bets being placed, the ratios start to lean heavily to the call side, if you see that. Listen, guys, if you're getting value out of these daily Palantir uploads, I ask you to do one thing. It's free, takes half a second. Leave a like on the video, and then get out of here and enjoy your day. I greatly appreciate it, and I'll see you in the next one.